companies that are utilizing it to help drive are the ones that are much more transformational and having more success.
Hey, what's up YouTube? Jeremiah Hersey here, and welcome back to another PL300 test prep question. So today we're going to be talking about what happens when we publish our report into the Power BI service. So you build your report in the Power BI desktop for the most part, and then you're going to publish it out to the service, but it's good to get an understanding of what happens when you actually publish to the service. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we'll get into the question. Let's go ahead and get started. So when you create a Power BI report, you can create it off of a lot of different data sources. And so we're going to talk about those data sources first and what happens when we create a Power BI report. We can have sources such as a SharePoint folder. We can also connect to a Excel spreadsheet, either directly or from inside of a SharePoint folder. And in the last video, we talked about data flows, which is essentially the Power Query editor online. And so we can connect to all of these sources. And so when you build your Power BI report, so that's kind of like the next stage. Once you identify your sources, we're then going to build our Power BI report. So as these sources connect into our Power BI report through the Power BI desktop, we can start building out the visualizations and everything like that. We can start creating our data model. So once you finalize the report though, that's where we're then going to move to the next layer, which is publishing out to the Power BI service. So when we publish out to the Power BI service, you need to be aware of a couple things. So when you publish your report, it's actually going to publish it into two separate pieces. So the first is the report itself. This is going to contain all of the visuals related to the report. So anything that you build inside the Power BI report, the charts, the graphs, anything like that is going to be isolated into the report for where the visuals are located. The other part is what's known as a Power BI data set. So this is the actual data within inside of the report. So this is a way for Power BI to manage the data that's published out into the Power BI service. So when we publish, it's going to separate them into two. So this is the publishing step when we publish out to the Power BI service. So as we create these Power BI reports, depending upon our data source, okay, we're going to publish out to the service and it's going to separate it into a report and a Power BI data set. Additionally, down here, you can also connect to a Power BI data set inside of the Power BI desktop. So as an additional connector, we can also connect directly into a Power BI data set. Now, one of the reasons that you might want to do this is that typically when we're dealing with Excel files, this could either be clean or unclean data. Meaning that it might need to have some transformations occur with inside the Power Query editor. We might need to change some column types and things of that nature. Typically with a data flow is meant for data transformation. Once again, it's a cloud-based technology. It's essentially the Power Query editor online, and it gives us the ability to share these transformations across our business unit. So typically, this is going to be cleaned data. but it can also just hold information that is unclean as well. But typically the way that you would use a data flow is that it would already be prepped and clean. Now, SharePoint is just a file hosting service, and it can hold a lot of different information within inside of it. Once again, this could either be clean or unclean data. But what kind of sets the Power BI data set apart from the rest of these is as we publish to the service, this is going to be the finalized data set for our report. And so this will always be our clean data. No matter what, this is going to be clean data because it's isolated from the Power BI report from when we published it. And so now that we have a better understanding of how the data is structured, once again, there are a lot of different data sources. There's over 150 data sources that we can use to build our Power BI report. But having an understanding of what happens when we actually publish to the service is going to give us an understanding of how to answer this question. So let's go ahead and get started with the question itself. The question says, for the sales department at your company, you publish a Power BI report that imports data from a Microsoft Excel file located in a SharePoint folder. The data model contains several measures, and measures, you can think of them like mathematical formulas using the DAX language, the data analysis expression language. And it asks us, you need to create a Power BI report from existing data. The solution must minimize development effort. Which data source should you use? So as we read this question, it's important to point out a couple different things. The first is that it says that we publish a Power BI report. So when we publish that Power BI report, remember it separates it into two different pieces. The Power BI report with the visuals included, and then a Power BI data set. So the report that's published into the service, it's just telling us some background information that it uses an Excel file that's located inside of a SharePoint folder. So the original report grabs an Excel file that's located inside of SharePoint. So it says that we need to create a Power BI report from existing data. This is really the key to the question here. So we need to create a Power BI report from the existing data. So remember, if we look at a Excel workbook, such as the option D here, that this could be either clean data or unclean data. It depends on how you've set this up. And so if we were to create a new Power BI report, then we might have to do the same transformations that we've already done in the original report. And so, yes, we can connect to Excel, but we want to minimize development effort. So as we look at the data flow, okay, so Power BI data flow, in this question, it doesn't mention that we're using data flows. And so with that being an option for clean or unclean data, the question doesn't specifically talk about a Power BI data flow. And we're not going to want to add additional components into this report if we don't have to. Once again, it has to minimize the development effort. The third option here, a SharePoint folder. So once again, SharePoint is just hosting that original file. Remember, the Excel file is inside of that SharePoint. But once again, if we connect to that, we still might have to do transformations in order to get the data model correct. Our goal is to create a Power BI from the existing data. That's the key to this question. And so the correct answer for this question is going to be A, a Power BI data set, because as we publish the original report into the service, it isolates it into a report with just the visuals and a Power BI data set. To minimize effort, that Power BI data set is already clean, it's ready to go, it's modeled, and so we can just start building that new report off of the existing data that's inside of the Power BI service. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content. I'll see you in the next one.